Hello and welcome to the latest video from me, Fiona Mullen at Sapienta Economics. Today I'm going to be looking at public and private sector earnings in Cyprus. That's wages plus any overtime. And the reason I'm doing that is we've now got full data for 2024 along with the subsectors. But before I get to that, let me just give you a little plug for a course I'm going to be doing on the 3rd of July, Thursday the 3rd of July, from 9 o'clock in the morning until 12:15 in the early afternoon on the subject of interpreting economic statistics. The basic idea is, let's say you're a bank, you're about to lend a lot of money to someone. How can you interpret economic statistics to tell you whether that's a good idea or not? Same goes if you're a business about to borrow a lot of money or any other sort of business investment decision. So you can sign up if you Google EIMF Fiona Mullen. You can find me. The European Institute of Management Finance is a leader in professional training. I did my CISEC advanced exam with them, and I continue to do various other courses to keep up that certification. So let's get back to what I'm talking about today. I'm going to look at the latest data from 2024. Then I'm going to look at who's the best paid, who's the worst paid among the broad sectors. And then I'm going to have a look at the subsectors within those, who's the best and worst paid. And then we'll start looking at public and private sector. How has this changed over time? And what happens if we exclude some of the higher paying private subsectors? And then one extra little nugget at the end for you. So what do the latest data say? So the average all economy monthly earnings reached €2,487 in 2024. They rose by 3% in real terms, so inflation adjusted terms. The nominal change between 2003 and 2004 was 5.2%, but we had 2.3% inflation, so the real change was 3.0%. That's not bad growth, and there's no surprise that the real GDP growth last year was 3.4%. These things are quite closely connected. It wasn't great if you're a business struggling to contain costs, but in terms of broad economic growth, that's a positive sign, let's say. So, who's the best and worst paid? At the top, we have financial and insurance activities, earning $4,695 per month. I think this is on a 12-month basis. These are going to be not just banks and insurance companies, but also probably foreign exchange trading companies, those kind of things. Information and communication is number 2, average salary, including any overtime, of $4,211. Now, information and communications, that will have benefited from government programs to essentially attract non-EU nationals from places like Ukraine, Israel, Russia to come here, earn a handsome salary, and with a certain threshold of salary, you get a nice big fat income tax discount. Something which actually the local IT Cypriots are a little bit annoyed about because they think that we're not doing enough to keep highly skilled Cypriots here, but we're doing quite a lot to attract non-Cypriots. Of course, attracting non-Cypriots also helps the real estate sector, so, there's swings and roundabouts, as it were, with each policy. Now, the third is electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning supply. I don't know why that's so high. It might be related to the oil and gas sector, which I'll get to in a moment, but it might just be well-paid engineers at the state-owned Electricity Authority of Cyprus helping to keep the lights on this summer, we hope. Mining and quarrying, this is going to be affected by oil and gas sector. So we've got some of the biggest companies in the world have got licenses offshore Cyprus for natural gas, and so that will affect that. And here we have public administration at number 5 with an average salary, gross salary, this is before social insurance, before tax, of $3,250. And then way down at the bottom, we have essentially people working in shops, 1,785, people working in tourism and food delivery and so on, 1,585, and agriculture, hunting and forestry not even reaching the minimum wage. Why? Because this is dominated by asylum seekers and agriculture is excluded from the minimum wage, as is domestic workers. They don't even give data for them. There's about 22,000 domestic workers. These are mainly women working in the home, looking after our elderly. They earn, and this is anecdotal, 450 to 500 a month before social insurance, but that includes accommodation. And just to give you a comparison here, in terms of employment, some of the worst paid are actually the highest in terms of employment. So the retail sector employs more than anybody else, and accommodation and food services, so tourism, the second largest employer. Construction is quite high. And all the way down here, with only a few hundred, is the sector that actually pays the most. Same with electricity, is not the hugest employer, right? So what about subsectors? So it's a similar pattern. Within that broader sector of mining, the mining support activities are taking home a nice fat, well, not taking home, before tax, 7,494. Again, this is going to be your highly paid executives of huge international companies. Financial and services, I'm wondering whether this also includes shipping finance. Information service activities, similar here, okay. And again, way down, even below the minimum wage of 1,000 a month is the agricultural. There's quite a lot of manufacturing in the low paid as well. So how does the public sector compare with the private sector? So as we saw, the average earnings in the whole economy last year was 2,487 before social insurance, before tax, and on a 12-month basis, right? 12 salaries a year basis. And this was 3% higher than the average for the private sector, right? How did I do this? So public sector, I took the narrow definition. This is the code O, that's public administration, defence and social security. They were earning on average 3,250. And then with a bit of multiplication and subtraction and division, you can infer what everybody else was getting, and that was 2,426, okay? I will admit that if you added education and healthcare into this number, it would bring it down. But what you can say from this, the public sector, at least narrowly defined, is getting paid just over a third more than the private sector, right? And over time, they have always been paid more than the private sector. Okay, you can see a little bit of narrowing here, which I'll get into in a moment. So the premium over time, so how much more does the public sector get than the private sector? And again, this is the narrow definition, right? So as I said, it was 34% more than the private sector in 2024, but that's a lot less than it has been for most of the recent history, where it was close to 50% in some years, right? It suddenly dropped here, and we'll get into that in a moment. And then I thought, well, what if the jump here had something to do with the government bringing in incentives to third country, non-EU nationals to come here with their high skills and their high salaries and get income tax deductions? Because 2022, February, was the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia, sanctions imposed, and the government scrabbled to find other ways to attract business to Cyprus, quite successfully, I must say. And so I wondered whether if we took out essentially ICT workers and other high-paid workers, would we still have this difference? And the answer is yes, we do. Public sector earnings premium over the private sector, if you exclude the highly paid, by which I mean those top four: mining, high-tech, finance, professional services. The premium over the private sector, of course, gets bigger because you're taking out the higher paid private sector. But you still get this massive jump in 2022. So what's going on? Is it, I wondered, something to do with the cost of living allowance, which was suspended for a while? If you remember, I had this slide in a previous video. So I went back to look, and no, it's not COLA, because that began from January 2018, and it was actually June 2023 when it went from 50 to 66.7% of the change in the index. So you should have seen a jump in 2003, not 2002, okay? So another theory I tried to test was, did it have something to do with asylum seekers? Because I remembered that there was a restriction on asylum seekers seeking employment. It used to be 1 month and it went to 9 months. So I went to look up, and it turns out it wasn't 2022, it was October 2023. So it's not that. So what's going on? I think we found the answer here: job vacancy rate. So as you all remember, we were all stuck in the house in 2020, and then the economy started to open up, and tourism especially started to open up from 2021, but especially 2022. And what we saw was quite a big leap in the job vacancy rate. So you're an employer, you suddenly need more employees, especially in tourism, because the economy's open again and everybody wants to go on holiday because they've been stuck indoors for 2 years. And you can't get the staff because there's a shortage. And so what do? You have to put up your wages. So that was what I think is going on, just to have those side by side. So we have a leap in the job vacancy rate, and suddenly you have to start paying people more. And that's why the premium of the public sector over the private sector starts to shrink. And let's check that against actual earnings growth. And indeed, this is what we have. Private sector earnings starts growing much faster than the public sector. From the beginning of the opening of the economy, if you remember, we started to open a little bit in 2021 and it really rockets in 2022. So this is why you see the narrowing of the gap between public sector and private sector workers. Bottom line is there's demand for labour and there's not enough labour to fill it. So each month in my monthly in-depth deep dive, I like to find little nuggets like this. So this is just a sneak peek into the kind of things that you will see in my monthly report. Sometimes they're just of general interest, like this. Sometimes they're rather more important. For example, back in 2011, you could see that Laiki, Cyprus Popular Bank, was in trouble because it was hiding statistics. So when I see little anomalies, I really do like to dig until I find out what the answer is. Last month, I found an anomaly in Hellenic Bank statistics. It's not in trouble like he was, but there's something not quite right about what they're reporting in their statistics, and they're about to be taken over by Eurobank. So if you want that kind of thing and you have the budget, go over to sapientiaeconomics.com. If you don't have the budget for that kind of in-depth reporting, you can go to cypruspocketbrief.substack.com and you can buy just the executive summary for 100 a year. That's it from me. Thank you for listening.